let's talk about labyrinths. Now, this is something that I've been intrigued by for a number of years, and I've been reading about a lot more lately. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how it has relevance for gameplay and game design, but also problem solving and clear thinking. And I will acknowledge right away as I get into this topic that there are different game designers and philosophies about game design, where some want to get rid of this whole labyrinth concept or framework, and others find it really, really useful today. I'm a pretty classical person when it comes to the idea of game design and gameplay, and I actually find this to be really useful, and I think you're going to find it very, very interesting if you stay with me. So in this video, I'm going to take you on a bit of a history tour of where we get the idea of a labyrinth, and I want to give you two very distinct kinds of labyrinths in history, and we'll build upon that in future videos for how we can use this for solving puzzles and creating puzzles and games and that sort of thing. So the word labyrinth comes from the ancient Greek labyrinthus, and some people actually tie it to a smaller Greek word labrys, which is a double-sided axe that was used in particular religious traditions or practices, but there's a lot of debate around whether that smaller word is tied to labyrinthus or not. But most people, if you're talking to archaeologists or ancient historians and they're talking about the idea of a labyrinth, it's a very simple, classic concept that you can find somewhere around the Mediterranean thousands of years ago. You can find examples of it in Etruscan tombs in Italy, in the Mediterranean, even in Scandinavian cultures. When you move further into history, you'll see this in churches as well. But this original concept of a labyrinth was not a confusing maze. It was actually a simple kind of structure that was usually sort of a 7-layered structure. There's an entry point, and then you go through this and you follow the path until you get to a center place, and then you follow that same path out. So if you keep moving, there's really no chance that you're going to get lost or confused. You just need to stay on the prescribed path. And some people would say that that was part of the symbolism and the meaning behind it, is that it was a suggestion that there is a right path. There are right ways to go about life, right ways to go about clear thinking, right ways to go about problem solving and making wise decisions. And if you simply follow the path, you'll be led to the proper destination and out. It's only by quitting or ignoring the path that you get yourself in trouble. And actually, if you just keep moving, you can't even get out of the path the way these labyrinths are built. So there's that kind of symbolism or meaning that some people attribute to it. And these ideas of labyrinths seem to have been used for paths of meditation, of reflection, of some kind of religious symbolism and the like. I do believe that in some cases the labyrinths were a place of tombs, so it could have even been a time to reflect on or to remember loved ones or one's ancestors or other things like that. So that's one ancient concept of the labyrinth. But then we have this other idea that comes in that is the one that's really intriguing. And if you have eyes to see, you may even notice that this is where I get the title for my channel, Bull and Thread. And this one comes from an ancient myth in Crete. And I jotted down a little bit of this just to make sure that I don't mix it up on the video. So here's how it goes. There's this Cretan labyrinth that was built by Daedalus or Daedalus, depending upon how you want to pronounce it and whether you're trained in classical Greek or not. And Daedalus was this incredible inventor and creator. And King Minos wanted to have this labyrinth that was built in order to contain this creature called the Minotaur, or Minotaur, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, that was half man and half bull. And the king had a tribute, a sacrifice, a human sacrifice to the Minotaur that would be put in the maze. And this maze was so confusing, so conflicting, that even Daedalus, who designed it, could hardly find his way in and out of it. So the Minotaur was in there, and they would put the tribute in and put tributes in, and they would get apparently sacrificed to the Minotaur. And if you want to find the whole story of how this thing played out and how the Minotaur came into existence, I'm not going to give you that on this video, but you can check it out for yourself. It's fascinating and a little bit intriguing as well. But then comes, of course, the hero. And so Theseus is the hero who decides that he's going to get rid of this whole tribute sacrificial system. And that means he has to venture into this deadly labyrinth and defeat the Minotaur himself. The problem is, the place is so confusing that if you get in, you'll never find your way out. And this is where his lover, Ariadne, comes to help. So she is the daughter, I believe, of the king. Depends upon the different legend that you read. And so she gives him a special thread that he can use. And actually, later in history and certain retellings of this, it's a golden thread. So now you might figure out where the name bull and thread comes from this channel. And so so Theseus finds his way into the labyrinth. He goes in, he defeats the Minotaur, and somehow, actually, in some retellings of it, he finds these tributes and he brings them out, that they had been wandering in there and had not all died. And how did he find them and get them out? Well, that's a whole other question. Myths aren't told to be completely logical and explain everything perfectly. But he comes out and he finds his way out by using Ariadne's thread. So just as a quick aside, that's where I get the title for this channel. The bull is symbolic of the different challenges and risks and problems and puzzles and mysteries that we navigate in our lives. And the thread is the thread of reason and logic and wisdom that we use to kind of navigate some of those different decisions to help give us a little guide to find our way out of those complexities and those puzzles. And that's where I came up with the name for the channel, if some of you who are regular listeners want to know. So we have these two very different kinds of labyrinths. We have the classical concept of a labyrinth, which is just a very simple path that you can't get lost on, and it's intended to promote a kind of reflection, most likely, in some way, remembering and reflecting, and embedding in your mind the idea of following the right path. And then we have this concept of a labyrinth from this myth, this Cretan labyrinth, which is more what some modern people might call a maze, where it doesn't actually tell us why this labyrinth was confusing, but it seems to suggest, and many people imagine it to be a place where it's not just a single path, but there are some dead ends, and there are places that can lead in different ways, or maybe there's something that's almost kind of out of an Escher painting, where it's a staircase that seems to be leading in multiple directions. So in some way, there's a deceptiveness to it, a confusion to it. And if you read different historians throughout history, they have different theories about this. And by the way, you can certainly geek out on the different ideas of labyrinths throughout history, and I'm not going to go through a bunch of videos on that, but there are a number of them that are fascinating about labyrinths, and in Egypt, and even there's growing recent conversation about ancient labyrinths and whether some of them might still be there, or portions of them, and where they might be located underground, and so forth. So lots of interesting stories that you can read about that. But here's why I'm doing a video on labyrinths. These are really fascinating concepts, and I would suggest that the idea of a labyrinth is a foundational tool and piece for how people have thought about designing early games and even more recent games. Whether you're designing a treasure hunt or something like that. So think about the simple classical labyrinth that's just a single path that leads to a center place and then out. Okay, well, there are actually some games like that are narrative driven, and you're really just going through the story. You're a character in the story, and you play your way through the story. There are different adventures and things like that. And really, the only way that you ultimately lose the game, you're going to have to keep trying to make it through certain levels and so forth, but is if you quit. If you keep trying, it's sequential. You work your way in and you work your way out, and you just persist. And then there's another level that's not quite at this kind of Cretan labyrinth and myth, but it's one where it's really one path that you're going through. But imagine that along the way there are doors, and those doors have locks. I mean, these kind of metaphorical doors, and they have locks, and you're going to have the right key to make it through that door and to continue on the single path. Well, that's where we get the modern kind of clue chain treasure hunt concept or other things like that. That's sort of a metaphor or a framework for thinking about how you would design these. And then the third one would be one where you have your dead ends or what we call red herrings today. And that's the maze where maybe there aren't a lot of locks, or there could be doors that are locks, but there are all sorts of things that are there to confuse you, to slow you down, to mislead you, or you have to find your way through solving puzzles and problems to make it from one place to the next, and you work your way through. Now, what I find really interesting is that a lot of modern game designers, whether they realize it or not, are using the labyrinth construct that's in the back of their mind. And, and so sometimes you can actually begin to see it in their design. If you think about it, you can ask, well, what kind of a map do they have in their mind, a mental map that they're using to structure this game or this situation? And this actually happens even in learning environments. Good teachers actually design with a kind of path or a labyrinth or in other ways. And some do use puzzles and other different kinds of labyrinths, but it shows up in a lot of different places. And so if you notice and recognize that this labyrinth concept has been around for thousands of years, it has absolutely shaped people's thinking. And so sometimes by recognizing that there are these three main labyrinth types, and there's actually a fourth that I'll talk about in another video, you can begin to start to see the order in what otherwise seemed like chaos. And it might just help you solve some problems that you haven't been able to solve before. I've also found this really useful even in problem solving and troubleshooting in our lives and our work and the like, is you can use this kind of mental concept of a labyrinth to think about how you're navigating your way through different parts of this. And, and of course, if you are the designer and you're on the designer side, or you're someone new to wanting to design an environment, a learning environment or a treasure hunt or something like that, you can use one or more of these labyrinth concepts to literally map out your plan, and then you can go from there. Well, that's my first video on this idea. I'm going to take you into some other concepts related to labyrinths in future videos, but I wanted to get the conversation started with this video. I hope you find it useful, and I look forward to your comments and your questions.